Welcome to season 2 of Tech Unscripted. I'm James, and we're here to talk about a really important topic. Digital resilience is at the forefront of how Cisco are providing a secure and connected world, working on how we become the critical infrastructure for AI. But with the way the world is changing, one of the areas we really have to think about is data sovereignty as we become a global organization, work with global businesses. And to that end, I've got a great guest with me, Martin from HSBC, to come and dig into this topic. We'll have a lot of fun over the course of this, but maybe Martin, how about introducing yourself?
Yeah, sure. Martin Diath. I'm the Global Head of Contact Center Infrastructure and Portfolio Delivery Lead for Channels for the bank. It's a bit of a hefty title.
So it's like a really critical role for the bank, everything, because it's almost the front line of customer interaction.
It's pretty much the way all of our customers talk to us, whether that be through the traditional voice channel or whether they're texting us. But yeah, it all comes through my technology.
Okay, so let's maybe ease into this. Let's go for some quick fire questions. Can't start without, what keeps you up more at night? Outages or breaches?
Outages.
Why?
Outages for sure. Because we need to be on for our customers all the time.
Okay.
And if something goes wrong, then they can't deal with us and we breach their trust.
I like that word, trust. I think it's a really good one. That really goes into my next one. What does digital resilience mean for you?
Digital resilience, it's always on. Yeah, it's building applications, building services, building journeys for our customers that are always available 24/7.
So basically never stopping all the time. Got trust, 24/7, customers, kind of the forefront of that
Global
line.
reach.
Global reach. And then so data sovereignty, like what, if someone says that word to you, what does that make you feel?
Regulations.
Regulations.
Regulations. We've got global coverage. We operate in, 64, 65 countries. And we have, with that global reach, we have a responsibility to honour the sovereignty of each of those countries that we operate in.
Okay, so to recap, we've got trust.
Yep.
Well, actually, the most important thing is the customers, right? You're the front line of customers, building trust with a global reach, having to think about regulation, data sovereignty, do that 24/7. Have we missed anything as part of what you have to do?
Cyber, we haven't talked about.
That's cyber.
Yeah, breaches as well.
Okay, AI, we're going to touch on AI, or we're going to try
Yes.
and park that and put it kind of in the box and not talk about it that much?
Well, we can't not talk about AI, right? But let's talk about that a bit later.
Okay, so maybe for the audience, what does it really mean? So we're kind of the headlines of kind of running the contact center. How does that work? So we were talking earlier about it. I'm James, I live in the UK bank account, but we're here in Amsterdam. So how does that work if I need to phone up the bank?
So there's a few different lenses we have to think about when we're constructing or building contact center solutions. If we talk about primarily the voice channel is probably the most complicated one we have to deal with. So you could be a customer in the UK, you're roaming, you need to phone the bank. There's ways that the calls need to route in that fashion. But then there's other areas where you could be placing a domestic call in country, but then you're being answered in another country entirely. And, we've got an offshore setup. So there's huge amounts of regulation as to what we can and can't do. And when we deploy our architecture, we have to deploy different specific architectural patterns depending on what is required for each of those countries. So it's complicated.
Yeah, that's really complicated. So how do you go and think about preparing for that? Because you've also got the technology at a kind of functional level, but you have a lot of operational issues that you're going to
Correct.
run into as you're trying to tie those different functions together. How do you start that planning meeting with the team?
Well, we get a lot of help,
Yeah.
right? We're a heavily regulated bank. We have lots of teams that are available to help us. Anytime we talk about building a new service, we have to go through a process. We have to go and talk to cyber. We have to make sure that what we're doing is safe. And we also have to then go through a data visa process, which means that we have to articulate every single piece of data that is to be processed, how it's going to be processed, what is available per the country regulations, and of course that then spins off conversations with legal, regulatory, compliance teams, etc. So yeah, it's a lot to deal with.
It almost means, I'm just trying to put myself in your shoes, it almost feels like it would be too much to go and handle, right? So
well, I've got no hair to lose, right? So that's one thing.
Is that
stressful?
Because of the change in regulation, you've lost all your hair?
No,
and joking aside, I think we've seen, you kind of outlined the multi-country, multi-domain kind of area working in, and we'll come back to the cyber part, which is increasingly important. How has that changed with regulation over, say, the last decade?
Well, regulations are changing all the time, and I don't know whether it's a perception thing, but things seem to be changing a lot faster in these days. So we have to be on top of our compliance and those regulatory updates all the time. So if, for example, you have a country that says we need to do X and you have to do it by X date, we just have to jump on that. We have to make sure that we've built our platforms where we can adapt to those adjusting regulations.
So it's almost, you've got something that's quite strict, especially banking regulation is not very ambiguous, it's very defined, but you're almost having to build for change at the same time.
Correct.
Does that, when you think about the economics of it, does that get quite complicated on risk reward? How much are you going to build in kind of that flex into the platform?
Yeah. Risk is built into everything we do. So every decision, whether that be a technical decision, whether it be an operational decision, it always comes down to a risk conversation at the end of it. But it's a lot.
So I've got to ask then, would you prefer, you've worked in banking a while, I'm going to say a long time because that might date you, but a while.
Yes.
Would you prefer to work in a regulated or non-regulated industry?
So that is a really interesting question because I have worked in a non-regulated industry for a small section of my career, and that was, it was totally different. So, you are free to make changes as you wish, how you architect things, and you're almost, that feeling of just being, you can deploy anything you want, however you want, based on your own kind of technical feedback and your own technical decisions, but then what standards are you applying to those rules? So, when you have to build trust for your customers, if you've got no controls that you're complying against, or you've not got a lengthy change process, all those things are there or are designed to protect the environment, protect the service, protect the platform.
So ultimately, as you start to kind of go back to basics, you're almost working in a self-imposed regulatory environment. You've got to start to bring in controls, constraints, you've got to go and have standardization. So,
correct. So that you by default, you kind of bring them in, even if they're not as defined policy.
So it almost sets you free a little bit of regulation because you've got defined ground rules to go and run with inside.
You know where you stand. I think it causes us a bit of a headache when we get challenging deadlines to hit, but it's just the way it is.
So on the regulations, the data sovereignty.
Yep.
It's a big topic at the moment. I think the world is definitely more aware of data flows. I think maybe a decade ago when cloud was starting to come up, people still not quite realizing that was actually in a data center. But I think now, especially younger generations are acutely aware of their kind of the data and where it goes.
Yes.
We've got the rise of data as a economic lever, and we're starting to see some of the sovereignty regulations go around that, which is a good thing, right? We're protecting people's data, we're looking after them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we've got, we have all the policies and processes in place, and I think people are far more aware now about their own data and how it's being used and, right to delete and opt out of things. I think the industry in general has come a very long way. But it starts to get interesting when we talk about sovereignty and, we probably can't not have a discussion about sovereign AI and what the future of that might look like. And I'm kind of keen to hear some of your thoughts on Cisco's view of that.
So I think it's a really interesting proposition around data sovereignty, because when you take it back to first principles, just like you're saying about regulators, when you start to treat it as a series of controls for you to be able to go and understand your boundaries. So the big thing we believe at Cisco is giving the flexible deployment choices to our customers so they can start to go and think about their data architecture, the network architecture, infrastructure that meets either regulatory environment, and then also thinks about the customer need and cost controls at the same time. So now if you take that and someone says, well, data can't leave this country, like, well, okay, now let's go and work within inside of that constraint. And how do we then go and assure that's working? Well, that needs a few things. One, the network assurance, what's going through that network. From an observability point of view, do we understand everything that's going through my infrastructure, how that's working? And then the control side on security and compliance. Martin, UK employees are allowed to, maybe for argument's sake, there's loose regulations, is allowed to go and touch that UK data when he's in the UK, but when he's outside of the UK, he's not allowed to go and touch that. So how do we go and have the right controls on that? Or are you on, say, the 2-week mandatory leave that you get on banking? Yeah,
exactly. I mean, just to your point there around the right to share that data around, because I mentioned the kind of data visa process and documenting what we're going to do with data. And when you've got a global span and coverage like we have, if you've got some customer data based on, customer data for a customer in a country, let's say Hong Kong, for example, does it mean that you can share the retail data about that customer over in the US or the UK if they're for business banking purposes or looking to lead generate? Well, you can't do that. So we can't even share a data about a customer in one region with all regions. So we've actually got protection within the bank.
So it's almost like a matrix of like data classification. Do you have a data classification strategy? Actually, let's start with this. Let's go with a simple question.
Yep.
I kind of understand banking because I know there are banks. I know you can send money as part of them, and I turn up as a young graduate in your organisation.
Yep.
You're going to sit me down and say, James, let me teach you about regulation, data sovereignty. Like, how do you even start that process with someone?
We have quite a strong onboarding process. We have a lot of governance around bringing someone in the first place. We can't just make an offer to anyone without doing the right checks behind the scenes. But then we have rigorous training programs. So we have mandatory training that we have to do. We have to comply with those trainings to say, right, here's your operational risk training, here's your third-party risk training, here's your cyber compliance training.
You've got this image of me in this cubicle in front of the screen for a long, long time.
Exactly.
How long does it take, right?
Well, if you join, you've got a minimum of about 3 weeks just getting up to speed on
that's not too bad.
All the compliance side of things. And, that's just accepted. It's required.
And do you find then people have a much better understanding of systems design after that?
I think so, yes. I think it's those kind of decisions and putting the subject of risk under everything, because risk is everyone's deal. It's not just, you work in risk management, therefore you're the risk guy.
Just pass it off to someone else.
Just whatever. We all have a part to play in that managing risk process. So when we are defining systems, we're building them based on a certain risk profile for that particular region or for that particular market or that particular tech stack.
Okay, so I've been trained. I'm starting to understand, and I'd say the beginnings of understanding. I've met, I think, the minimum bar to be able to go and do this. And we touched on data classification.
Yes.
So would that be kind of a first project to go and send me on, how we're going to go and think about data classification and what that means? Or was that?
All of our data, there's a lot of data, as you can imagine, with the bank. It's all classified, whether it's for internal purposes, whether it's restricted, whether it's public data. So literally every item of data that we have has a classification.
And then do you publish
every email that we send, for example, we have to specify what data.
So it almost becomes then just part of your daily business. It just becomes normal. It doesn't become a...
It's normal.
Do you then have like a data dictionary to be able to go and describe all of the policies and kind of look all of that up?
Absolutely, yeah.
So we kind of got train someone, then we're talking almost about a knowledge management strategy to be able to describe the complexity. So if I'm not sure about something, I can quickly go and understand the implications of classification X.
Yeah, exactly. So and then there's loads of forums that you can attend, whether it's just a drop-in, you can ask questions, or formalised training. But...
So that the drop-ins and kind of the different forums, that almost sounds like it's a cultural change you've got as an organisation to say almost like it's okay not to understand this and being very open about it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going through a big kind of cultural change at the moment that's being led from our CEO. Yeah. But yeah, it is okay to not know these things, and that's why the information is made available.
That's really cool, because I think that's then getting the best out of people, because then you've got no stupid questions. You can be inquisitive. You can kind of ask.
There's no such thing
questions.
as a stupid question, right?
We'll see. Tell me at the end of this after I've interviewed you a bit more. So the next part about it then is, how do you go and think about the cost behind this? Contact center is critical. You can't run a business like yours without contact centers. But then when you're looking at decisions on where you go and place contact centers, how do you start to go and build that process to look at countries, data sovereignty, regulations, workforce costs, and then infrastructure costs behind that? Maybe just a bit of advice for people, because as businesses become a bit more global, it's a complex question.
It is really difficult, and it's not an easy answer, because within the bank we have various models on how we set things up. So, for example, we have the First Direct brand. Yeah. So that is all very heavily UK based. No IVRs when you phone up. You go straight through to an agent. You speak to them for a bit, and you maybe have follow-on transfers from there. But the number of calls that generates, or the volume and the number of customers, is relatively small compared to some of the bigger, wider brands like HSBC UK, for example, which is a far bigger customer base, different operating model. We have agents onshore and offshore. And part of that decisioning is around cost, right? Because you've got offshore agents are as a lower cost model, that we are always looking for efficiency gains when we're operating in various different ways. And those efficiency gains could be things like looking at call summarization technologies, where we're real-time transcribing calls, we're offering the agent kind of next best action, things to do, and even kind of post-call summarization. So they're saving 30, 90 seconds post-call, instead of having to type up, "This customer spoke to me about changing their bank account," it already does it for you. So they just quickly scan through it. Yeah, they did talk to me about that. So that move on to the next call.
So do you think then the decision is a technology decision or more a strategic business decision?
It's a strategic business decision.
Constrained by technology?
Technology is there to remove constraints, right? But I think the bit that we didn't talk about there, or I didn't mention, was the customer's desires as well. Because, what is your customer demographic? What is it that they expect? Is it, if, for example, you're creating a new call routing or new team, or even, in fact, a brand new product that's maybe Premier Banking, well, you're going to provide a different service to that's maybe operationally a little bit more expensive to run than another part of the business, which is just current account, checking account, you're just doing simple, basic transactions and that's it. So it's not a simple decision, and it's normally a multitude of stakeholders will come into play. But again, regulations are always bottom line or running through those decisions.
But also, it's sounding like regulations are almost the ground rules, the guardrails that you work within, and then you can kind of accelerate from there.
Correct. And, when we start to get into the new world where we're deploying cloud-based technologies and we're moving away from on-prem where it's appropriate, that's a whole new ballgame as well, where, if in a particular market or region, what happens if you can't have customer data in a cloud environment? Or even agent data in a cloud environment? So what are you going to do in that scenario?
So you mentioned earlier then, just to expand on that, around, you brought young James into there, I'm bad at typing and it's going to auto-summarize me. Like, that's amazing. Like, that's less work for me to do before I realize I now have to answer another call. But that's then relying on kind of AI summarization technology, which quite often is hosted. It might be self-hosted by yourself, or quite often from a profitability point of view, it might make more sense to go with a SaaS service. How do you deal then with the data sovereignty? Because you could end up with having lots of different architectural choices depending on the market you're working in. So there's like the sprawl of technology as utilizing these things can end up going...
It is. And, I think everyone is hungry for the AI killer use case as well. And, there's lots of different AI use cases across the bank. And, we have AI boards now to kind of validate or rubber stamp that a particular use case is worth going for. But we have lots of design authorities as well throughout. So we typically start with a standardized model to say, right, this is what everyone is going to have. Yeah. Where do we need to deviate? So if that particular artifact needs to go into a different country or different region or different teams, it's like, well, can it go the way it is? Or do we need to do something different? Okay, well, we need to tweak the architecture on that, or we need to tweak how that AI model is developed. Well, actually, we need to do it via an on-prem platform over here, or our own maybe internal cloud environment, because it's not appropriate for public cloud.
And do you constantly reassess that, kind of look at your technical debt because of different deployment choices you had to make, and seeing if you can then go and consolidate that as much as possible?
Technical debt is real, right? So that does happen, because sometimes you need to put in some technical debt to maybe fulfill a requirement that might be a regulatory requirement or an Ofcom requirement at the time. But then that technical debt gets raised on a risk register, and depending on the classification of the risk is how quickly you would address it.
So I started this conversation thinking it was going to be complicated. But I'd say it's almost not complicated. It's very structured inside. It's complex because there's lots of different things inside of it, but it's not actually overly complicated. Let's make a nuance in.
Yeah, you're right. It is complex, but we have really good guardrails and we have a really good framework to help us. Because then, a topic that we haven't mentioned is when we're building and designing these things, we also need to think about things like acquisitions and divestitures as well, because if, for example, we happen to sell part of the bank in a certain region, it's like, well, how do we slice and remove that piece of it? Or if we're making an acquisition, how do we incorporate that into our architecture? So that's, again, another concept we haven't talked about, really.
So, and it's really going back to that principle of, the training, the understanding of the environment. I've really liked the notion of that open culture to go and question, because that helps you deal with complexity, because you're kind of breaking down those barriers. I think it sounds like you say technology is not really your limitation behind this. It doesn't always make it easy, but not your limitation. Would that be fair?
I don't think it's a limitation, no. I mean, it's probably equal thirds between business and operational requirements. We have technology requirements or strategies, and then your whole risk and compliance as well. And probably those three things make up the whole of whatever direction or deployment we're set for.
Okay, so I'm kind of coming towards the end of where we are, but I think we've got to do the classic questions. What advice would you give to a young Martin kind of going into this industry? Maybe you're starting this again.
Starting again, it's about thirst for knowledge, thirst for understanding differences. I mean, when I say differences, I mean differences in cultures, right? We've got this global spread, and we have almost a casual approach to the internationalism of how we operate. You know, I'm often on a Zoom or WebEx conference platform, talking to people from all over the globe.
Yeah.
And, you know, my parents can't get their head around the fact that I'm having a conversation with people in Hong Kong, India, Poland, UK, Canada, Mexico, and the US.
It's breathtaking, isn't it? And some of the advances we've been talking about at like Cisco Live and others is that the rate of throughput you can now get through networks almost removes that limitation completely from what you can do in the future. It is,
absolutely. It's incredible. And I think, and another piece of advice I say is don't get overwhelmed by the pace of change as well, because things are moving really quickly now. I was very fortunate to go to the archives in Hong Kong when I was over there. And I got to see kind of the original creation of the bank and how it started. And one piece that really interested me was at the time when they started, if someone in Hong Kong needed to speak to someone or have a conversation with someone in the UK, they would write a letter. Yeah. They'd put it on a ship. That would sail to the UK, 3 months. Someone will get it, read it, write a response, put it on a ship, sail it back to Hong Kong. So one question, 6 months. And that's not like that anymore. We're processing 150 odd million voice interactions a year.
I kind of like the idea of having 3 months to reply to an email.
Can you imagine that, right?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
That's like breathtaking, like the pace of change that's happened. So I'm not going to ask you what you're excited about for technology. I'm going to ask a slightly different question to wrap this up.
Okay.
What do you look for in a hiring profile to be prepared for the future that you think you're going towards?
Adaptability. I think, you know, we always talk about what's happening in the future. We don't really know what's going to happen in the future. All we can kind of deal with is the present and the tools that we have today. And if you're adaptable, you can make your way through any of those deviations of technology or whatever the next thing that comes along. If you can adapt and evolve with it.
So people that are happy to work within side of constraints, but can do that with a view to what might be the future ahead of us to prepare for the round the corner.
Absolutely. Here's a new piece of tech, here's a new process, here's a new thing over here. It's all very shiny. Well, how do we fit it into these controls? Yeah, is it safe? Is it the right thing for us to be doing?
And I think that's kind of the message of how we go and design things at Cisco is go and like, how do we go and help you go and solve your problems of today whilst building that critical infrastructure to allow you to capitalize on the future ahead. Martin, absolutely. Thank you so much for being with me today. Thank you to everyone who's listened to this really interesting conversation around data sovereignty and a bit kind of beyond that. Have a look, there's loads more episodes on Tech Unscripted. Keep watching on the journey, keep learning, and thank you very much.